April 13th, 1970, 9:08 p.m. 3 astronauts are floating 200,000 miles from Earth. The mission is going so smoothly that the major TV networks didn't even bother airing their live broadcast that day. Nobody was watching. Jim Lovell was filming a tour of the spacecraft for maybe 100 people at home. Fred Haise was reading. Jack Swigert was doing routine checks. Then a bang. Not a small bang. Not a beep. Not an alarm. A bang so violent the entire spacecraft shuddered, like something had hit them from outside. Power dropping. Oxygen pressure gone. And outside the window, a cloud of gas venting silently into space. Jim Lovell looked at his crew. Then he picked up the radio. "Houston, we have a problem." They were 200,000 miles from home. Their oxygen was bleeding into space, and NASA had never not once trained for this. This is the story of how 5 words, a roll of duct tape, and one impossible decision brought them home. Before we get into the disaster, you need to know who was on this ship, because this story isn't really about spacecraft. It's about people. Jim Lovell, commander, 42 years old, Navy test pilot, had already been to space 3 times. He was supposed to walk on the moon on this mission. That was going to be the greatest moment of his career. He'd waited years for it. Jack Swigert, command module pilot. Here's something wild. Swigert wasn't even the original pilot. He was added to the crew 72 hours before launch, 3 days after the original pilot was exposed to German measles. 72 hours. Think about that. The mission of a lifetime. And he almost didn't make it onto the ship. Fred Haise, lunar module pilot. Quiet. Meticulous. He'd trained for 2 years for this exact mission. He had checklists for his checklists. 3 guys, 1 spacecraft, a 240,000-mile journey. And everything was going perfectly fine, which in space is always when things go wrong. So, let's go back to that moment. April 13th, 9:07 p.m. 56 hours into the mission, Mission Control sends a routine instruction to the crew. Stir the oxygen tanks. This was totally normal. The tanks could develop uneven concentration pockets. Stirring them kept the pressure readings accurate. They'd done it dozens of times. Swigert flips the switch. What happened next took 0.8 seconds. Oxygen tank number 2, which had been secretly damaged during a pre-launch test that nobody caught, ignited. The explosion destroyed tank 2 completely. It ruptured tank 1, and it damaged 2 of the 3 fuel cells that powered the entire spacecraft. In less than a second, Apollo 13 went from a routine moon mission to a crippled, dying spacecraft, losing power and oxygen simultaneously with no manual, no precedent, and no plan. Here's the thing that gets me about this moment. In space, there is no sound, so the crew didn't hear an explosion. They felt a shudder. They saw the lights, and they watched gas drift past the window in total, eerie silence. That silence, I think, is scarier than any alarm. Lovell picked up the radio, and with the calm of someone who has spent 20 years training to not panic. "Houston, we have a problem. Now here is what separates Apollo 13 from every other space emergency in history. It wasn't one problem. It was 6, all at the same time. Problem 1, power. 2 fuel cells destroyed. The command module was now running on backup batteries only. Those batteries were designed for one thing, the 3-hour re-entry burn at the end of the mission. They had maybe 15 hours of charge. The mission had 6 days left. Problem 2, oxygen. Both service module oxygen tanks were compromised. The crew was breathing fine for now, but the clock was running. Problem 3, water. The fuel cells that made electricity also made water as a byproduct. Dead fuel cells meant no new water. The crew had roughly 9 pounds of stored water per man for the next 6 days. The human body needs about 48 pounds to survive that long. They had less than 20% of what they needed. Problem 4, heat. Without power, the cabin temperature would drop to near freezing. Electronics designed to work at 70 degrees would start failing. Problem 5, trajectory. The explosion physically pushed the spacecraft off course. Left uncorrected, Apollo 13 would arc past Earth and drift into deep space, forever. Problem 6, carbon dioxide. 3 men, sealed cabin, breathing. CO2 building up with every exhale. The filters that removed it had a limited capacity, and the ones designed for the spacecraft the crew had moved into were the wrong shape. The command module canisters were square. The lunar module slots were round. 6 simultaneous life-threatening problems, 200,000 miles from Earth. With no repair manual, Houston had one move: improvise everything. What happened over the next 87 hours is genuinely one of the most impressive improvised engineering runs in human history. And I want to walk you through it because the details are insane. The first call was the biggest one. The command module was dying. Move the entire crew into the lunar module. The small, spindly lander that was only designed to carry 2 men to the moon's surface and back. It had no heat shield. It wasn't built for deep space travel. It had enough power for maybe 45 hours. It was also the only thing on the ship still functioning. So 3 men into a 2-man lifeboat for a 6-day journey home. Now for the CO2 problem. And this is the one that blows my mind every time. The lunar module's CO2 filters were round cylinders. The spare filters from the command module, the ones that still worked, were square boxes. Same chemical inside, completely different housing. Round hole, square peg. On Earth, that's a design inconvenience. In space, with 3 men slowly poisoning themselves, that's a death sentence. Engineers at Mission Control had 4 hours to solve it. The constraint: use only what is physically on the spacecraft. Nothing from Earth could reach them in time. Their solution used a plastic bag, a cardboard cover torn from a flight manual, 1 sock, and duct tape. They called it the mailbox. Engineers read the assembly instructions to the crew over the radio, 1 step at a time. The crew built it by hand in a freezing spacecraft, half delirious from dehydration and cold. It worked. The trajectory problem required a different kind of brilliance. They couldn't just reverse course. There wasn't enough fuel for that. Instead, NASA decided to use the moon itself. Let Apollo 13 continue toward the moon, loop around the far side, and use lunar gravity to slingshot back toward Earth. Elegant, but it required a precise engine burn using the lunar module's descent engine, which had never been fired in deep space, in a trajectory calculation done by hand, because the computers were powered down to save electricity. And here's the craziest part of the navigation. With the guidance computer offline, the crew had to align the spacecraft manually. They used the Earth as a target, literally pointed the window at our planet, and held the spacecraft steady by hand while they fired the engine. A navigation technique from the 1700s. On a spacecraft in 1970, 200,000 miles from home. The burn worked. They were going home, if they could survive the trip, because the next 3 days were brutal. The cabin temperature had dropped to 38 degrees Fahrenheit. Everything was covered in condensation. The crew was rationing water to 6 ounces a day, about 2 shot glasses. They couldn't sleep. They were freezing. Fred Haise was developing a kidney infection. Nobody ate much, and they just had to sit there and wait. April 17th, 4 days after the explosion. Earth is filling the window now, and they've just run into their last problem. The command module, the only part of the spacecraft designed to survive atmospheric re-entry, had been powered down and sitting in the cold of space for 4 days. Nobody had ever tried to power a command module back up from a dead cold start before. There was no procedure for it, so engineers at Houston wrote one from scratch, in real time, and read it to the crew step by step over the radio. And then came the thing nobody wanted to say out loud: the heat shield. The explosion had physically damaged the service module, which sat right up against the command module's heat shield. If that impact had cracked the shield even slightly, re-entry would be fatal. The capsule would burn up. There was no way to inspect it. No camera. No EVA possible in time. They would only know when they hit the atmosphere. The crew moved back into the command module. The lunar module, their lifeboat for 4 days, was jettisoned. Lovell watched it tumble away through the window. It saved their lives. It was gone now. 12:07 p.m. April 17th, Apollo 13 hits the upper atmosphere at 25,000 miles per hour. The heat shield glows white hot. Radio communications black out. The blackout usually lasts 3 minutes. 3 minutes pass. 4 minutes. 5. 6. Then static. Then a voice. "Okay, Joe." 2 words. They were alive. Apollo 13 never landed on the moon. Jim Lovell never got to walk on the lunar surface. He never went back to space after this. That moment, the thing he'd spent years working toward, never happened. And NASA calls Apollo 13 their greatest success. Not because everything went right, because when everything went wrong, simultaneously, catastrophically, 200,000 miles from help, 3 men and a few hundred engineers found a way anyway. The mailbox made of a sock and duct tape is in the Smithsonian now. The power-up procedure written in real time became standard training. Every mission since has been planned with the question, what do we do when this breaks? Because of Apollo 13, the answer is always we've already thought about it. 3 men went up, 3 men came home. That's the whole story. If this is the kind of story you want more of, subscribe. I'll see you in the next one.